It is the spring of 1892, and a small boat is scraping onto the black volcanic sand of Guadalupe Island, a lonely smudge of rock in the Pacific, about 150 miles off the coast of Baja California. The men climbing out of it are scientists, collectors. They have come a long way across open ocean in a wooden vessel, chasing a rumor that most of their colleagues back home believe is impossible. The rumor is that something out here is still alive. They walk up the beach, and there, hauled out on the sand in the flat morning light, they find them. 8 enormous animals. 8 of a creature the entire scientific world has already crossed off the books and filed under a single cold word: extinct. And then they killed 7 of them. Sit with that for a second, because it is the whole story in one sentence. The men who sailed all that way to prove this giant still existed looked at the last handful of them on Earth and shot all but one. Before we go any further, we need to fix the picture in your head, because this is not the animal you are imagining. When you hear the word seal, you think of something small and slick and playful, a dog-sized thing balancing a ball on its nose. Forget that completely. The animal on that beach was a northern elephant seal, and a full-grown male is a 2-ton mountain of muscle and blubber, as long as a car, with a great drooping snout and a bellow you can feel in your chest from across the sand. Picture something the size of a pickup truck heaving itself up a beach. That is what they found. That is what they nearly finished off. And here is what makes this one of the strangest survival stories on the planet. That near-empty beach, the one that held 8 animals in 1892, is connected to a coastline today that is so crowded you can barely find a patch of open sand between the bodies. Hundreds of thousands of these giants. And the way they came back, the actual mechanism of it, hides something the experts of the day never saw coming. So let us go back to the beginning, to the tray that emptied that beach in the first place. To understand why 8 animals was all that remained, you have to understand what people wanted from these creatures. What they wanted was oil. Go back to the middle of the 1800s. The world runs on oil that comes out of animals, not yet out of the ground. It comes out of the ocean. Whale oil lights the lamps of every city on the eastern seaboard and greases the machines of the Industrial Revolution. And men sail out for years at a time to hunt the great whales and boil them down into it. It is a brutal, enormous business. And by the middle of the century, it is running into a problem. The whales are disappearing. Decades of relentless hunting have thinned the whale populations along the Pacific coast to the point where a voyage can come home with half its barrels empty. So the whalers, standing on their decks with crews to pay and nothing to render, start looking around for anything else that will cook down into oil. And they find the elephant seal. You could not design an easier target. A whale you have to chase across open water in a small boat and drive a harpoon into and pray it does not pull you under. An elephant seal you just walk up to. They gather by the hundreds on open beaches to breed, packed shoulder to shoulder on the sand. On land they are almost helpless, dragging their enormous weight forward in slow heaving lunges. They cannot run. They will not leave. A bull will hold his patch of beach and his females against a rival to the death, which means he will also hold it against a man with a lance right up until the moment that loyalty gets him killed. And the payoff was obscene. A single large bull carried enough blubber to yield a couple 100 gallons of oil. So the crews came ashore, and they worked their way down the beaches, and they took everything. The bulls, the females, even the pups. There was no reason, in their minds, to leave any behind. Every animal on the sand was money in a barrel. It is worth slowing down here, because we are watching a species get erased in real time, and the people doing the erasing did not think of themselves as villains. They thought of themselves as making a living. That is usually how it works. Beach by beach, island by island, the elephant seal disappeared off the map. The colonies along the California coast went quiet. The rookeries on the offshore islands emptied out. By the 1880s, the hunters simply could not find them anymore, and the scientific community reached the obvious conclusion. The northern elephant seal was gone, wiped out, one more animal that had met the 19th century head-on and lost. The museums recorded it as extinct, and in a strange way, that verdict is what set up everything that came next. Because once the world had decided the animal no longer existed, a very particular kind of value attached itself to any that might still remain. If you could find the last of a species, if you could hold in your hands the proof of a thing the textbooks called dead, then those animals were no longer just barrels of oil. They were treasure. And that idea, the treasure logic, is what put a scientific collecting team on a boat to a remote volcanic island in 1892. They were not sailing out there to save the elephant seal. Let us be honest about what they were sailing out to do. They were going to collect it before it was gone for good. So here we are, back on the black sand of Guadalupe Island, and this is the part we need to slow down on, because it is uglier than a simple hunting tragedy. The men who land on that beach in 1892 are not whalers. They are not desperate crews looking for oil to feed their families. They are educated men, naturalists, some of them working under the umbrella of the Smithsonian, one of the most respected scientific institutions in the world. They know exactly what they are looking at. They understand that the animals in front of them may be the very last of their kind on the entire planet. And that knowledge does not stop them. It is the reason. Think about how this looked to a museum collector of the era. A species presumed extinct has turned up alive on a forgotten island. Every major natural history museum on Earth would want a specimen of it, a mounted skin, a clean skull, a full skeleton in a drawer, labeled and cataloged and preserved for science. The rarer the animal, the more precious the specimen. And what could possibly be rarer than one of the final survivors of a species the world had already buried? So they made a calculation that feels insane to us now and made perfect sense to them then. If these animals are doomed anyway, if extinction is coming no matter what anyone does, then the responsible thing, the scientific thing, is to secure specimens while you still can. Preserve them in the collection. Save them for the record. Save them by killing them. Of the 8 elephant seals on that beach, 7 were shot, skinned, and packed up to be carried back across the ocean into museum collections. 1 was left. Whether it slipped into the surf or was simply missed, the accounts differ. But the arithmetic of that day is almost too clean to be real. A species standing at 8 known individuals on Earth, and a team of scientists walks off the beach, having reduced it by 7. Read that back with nothing to soften it. The people best equipped in the entire world to understand what extinction meant. The people who studied it and cataloged the dead, looked at a living remnant of a giant and decided the smartest use of it was to make most of it dead. It is easy, more than a century later, to feel clean anger about this. And the anger is fair, but it is worth understanding the mindset because it was not cartoon cruelty. It was a deep, confident certainty that the animal was finished, that nothing could reverse it, and that a specimen behind glass was worth more than a seal in the surf that was going to die anyway. They were sure they were watching the end. They wanted a piece of it for posterity. They were wrong. That is the part they could never have known. Every assumption behind that day, the certainty that the species was doomed, the certainty that 8 animals could never be enough, the certainty that they were simply documenting an ending, every one of those was about to be proven spectacularly false. Because out past the breakers, out in the deep water beyond that beach, the story of the northern elephant seal was not actually over. Not even close. And the reason why is the quietest twist in the whole thing. It was hiding in the animal's own body, in a habit so simple that the men who thought they were watching an extinction never even saw it. Here is the mechanism. To hunt an animal all the way to extinction, you have to be able to find it, all of it, every last one. And the northern elephant seal, almost by accident, made that nearly impossible. These animals do not live on the beach. That is the thing everyone gets backwards. The beach is where you see them, so the beach is where you assume they all are. But an elephant seal spends the overwhelming majority of its life far out at sea, alone in the open Pacific, diving. They come ashore only twice a year, once to breed, once to molt. The rest of the time, for months on end, they are hundreds of miles offshore and hundreds of feet underwater, scattered across an ocean, invisible. And they do not all come and go on the same schedule. Their arrivals and their departures are staggered across the seasons and between the sexes, so that at almost any given moment, a large share of the entire population is out there in the deep, nowhere near land, nowhere near a hunter. So when the whalers worked the beaches clean, and when the collectors counted 8 animals on Guadalupe and assumed that was the world's entire supply, they were counting the animals that happened to be ashore that day. They never saw the ones far out in the water. The hunters could empty the beaches. They could not empty the ocean. Some animals were always somewhere else, a hidden reserve kept alive not by anyone's mercy, but by the plain geometry of a life spent mostly at sea. If you're finding this as wild as we do, take 1 second and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this kind of story reach more people who enjoy having their assumptions turned upside down. Then stay with us, because the way this remnant came back is even harder to believe than the way it nearly died. Here is the second half of the answer, and it is almost anticlimactic. Nobody bred them back. There was no captive program, no scientists hand-raising pups in tanks, no clever intervention that snatched the species from the edge. The truth is plainer than that, and a lot more humbling. In 1922, the government of Mexico made it illegal to kill them and put protection over Guadalupe Island, where the last of them were clinging on. The United States followed with protections of its own. And that was essentially the entire plan. People stopped killing them. That is, the whole rescue. Once the hunting stopped, the animals that had been riding out the slaughter in deep water did the only thing they had ever needed to do. They hauled ashore. They bred. They went back to sea, and they returned, and they bred again. And the population, freed from the single pressure that had been grinding it towards zero, began to climb. And now here's the fact that should stop you cold. Every northern elephant seal alive on Earth today, every giant on every beach from Baja to Point Reyes, traces back to that one surviving remnant, not to a healthy founding stock, to a scrap. The survivors numbered somewhere in a grim and genuinely contested range, as few as a couple dozen by some accounts, perhaps up to a couple hundred by others, but tiny by any honest measure. And from that, they came back. The recovery was not clever, and that is the best part of it. So let us keep being honest. We did not outsmart extinction. We did not engineer a comeback. We took our hands off the animal's throat and stepped back. And it turned out the giant had never needed our genius. It only ever needed us to stop. What it did with that opening is the payoff, and it is the kind of before and after that genuinely does not look real. So let us put a real number on it. From that handful of survivors on a single volcanic island, the northern elephant seal came back to more than 200,000 animals. 200,000. From a couple dozen or a couple hundred in the space of a single century. Drive the California coast today, and you can stand in front of it. Pull off Highway 1 at a place called Piedras Blancas, near San Simeon, and there is a stretch of beach where thousands of elephant seals haul out in the open, close enough that you look down on them from a low boardwalk. Go to Ano Nuevo, south of San Francisco, and in the breeding season the sand disappears completely under bodies. Go north to Point Reyes, and you will find them there too. Colonies that did not exist in living memory, now packed and roaring. And roaring is the right word. Stand at one of these colonies in the winter, and you hear them before you ever see them. The bulls throw their heads back and let out a deep, clattering, mechanical bellow, a sound like an old engine turning over inside a cave, and they do it to warn off rivals across a beach that runs wall to wall with 2-ton animals. The biggest males top out around 5,000 pounds. They rear up and slam into each other chest to chest, blood on the sand, fighting over stretches of beach, and the females packed onto them. And these giants, the ones sprawled out snoring in the sun, are among the most extreme athletes in the entire ocean. When an elephant seal leaves the beach and heads out to feed, it does not paddle around near the surface. It dives, routinely to a quarter-mile down and deeper. Some dives go past a mile beneath the surface, into cold black water where the pressure would crush almost anything else, and they hold those dives for well over an hour at a stretch, deeper and longer than most whales manage. Then they surface for a few minutes and go straight back down, again and again for months on end, barely sleeping, hunting in the dark. That is the animal the collectors of 1892 were so certain they were watching go extinct. Not a fragile little thing clinging to the edge of survival. One of the toughest, deepest diving, most formidable mammals in the sea, beaten down for a moment to a number you can count on your fingers, and then left alone just long enough to show what it could do. And this is where we come back to that beach. Remember Guadalupe Island? Remember the 8 animals on the black sand and the 7 that did not survive the visit. That beach, the emptiest beach in this entire story, the one that stood for the end of a species, is not empty anymore. Guadalupe is a stronghold again, alive with elephant seals, one of the anchor colonies of a population spread across thousands of miles of coastline. The exact beach that once held 8 now sits inside a comeback measured in the hundreds of thousands. If the story stopped right there, it would be one of the cleanest conservation wins on record. A giant hunted down to almost nothing, written off by the experts, shot down to a final few, and then flooding back the instant we stopped killing it. A miracle with a tidy, happy ending. But the story does not stop there. In 2024, scientists went looking inside these animals, down at the level of their DNA, and they found something the crowded, thriving beaches do not show you. The comeback came at a cost, and the survivors are still paying it. To understand what they found, you have to remember where all of these animals came from. Every single one of them squeezed through the same tiny doorway. That couple dozen, or couple hundred, survivors on Guadalupe. In biology, there is a name for a moment like that. A genetic bottleneck, when a population crashes to a handful and then rebuilds. Everything that comes afterward descends from that handful, which means the whole species inherits only the narrow slice of genetic variety those few survivors happen to be carrying. The numbers can recover completely. The diversity does not. In 2024, a research team led by scientists at Durham University in the United Kingdom sequenced and studied the genomes of these seals and published what they found. And it put hard numbers on something researchers had long suspected. The northern elephant seal is, genetically, one of the least diverse mammals we know of. A population of hundreds of thousands that, down in its DNA, still looks like the tiny group it collapsed to more than a century ago. And this is not just a curiosity on a chart. The study found that the bottleneck left real marks, what you might fairly call genetic scars. Stretches of the genome tied to important functions, including reproduction and the ability to forage, appear to have been compromised as the population was forced through that needle. The seals carry, written into their cells, the permanent signature of how close they came to ending. They are thriving in number and thin in variation at the very same time. Now, we want to be careful here, because this is exactly the kind of fact that gets twisted into a scarier headline than it deserves. It does not mean the northern elephant seal is quietly doomed or about to collapse all over again. Hundreds of thousands of them are out there right now, breeding, diving, holding their beaches. By every visible measure, the comeback is real and it is holding. What the genetics say is something quieter and more sobering. A species can lose so much, so fast, that even a total recovery in numbers cannot buy back what was lost inside it. The animals came all the way home. They just did not come home unchanged. There is something almost fitting about that. For a century, the crowded beaches told a story of complete redemption, a wrong made fully right. And it took looking at the DNA, the one place these animals cannot pose for the camera, to find the truth sitting underneath the triumph. The scar is still there. It is in every pup born on every beach. You cannot see it from the boardwalk. But it never left, so we are left holding two facts at once, and neither one cancels the other out. The northern elephant seal is one of the great comebacks in the history of wildlife. A giant pulled back from a literal handful to a coastline that overflows with them. And the northern elephant seal is permanently marked by how near it came to gone, carrying the narrow genetics of its worst moment forward into a future full of animals. Both are true. That is what makes it honest instead of a fairy tale. And it leaves us with a question that runs a little deeper than seals. If we can beat something down to 8 animals on a beach and still have it come roaring back, what does that actually say about what saving a species means? Because the answer this story gives is not the one you would expect. So stand on that beach with us, one more time. Not the empty one from 1892. This one, today. The sand has vanished under the weight of them. Bulls the size of cars throw their heads back and bellow at the winter sky. Females and pups crowd the shallows. The whole colony rises and falls and roars. Thousands of 2-ton giants on a coastline that a little over a century ago held 8 of them, and then 7, and then very nearly none. And here is what that beach teaches you, if you let it. We did not restore this. Not really. We did not breed these animals or engineer them, or bring them back through any cleverness of our own. We did the opposite of doing something. We stopped. We put down the lances and the collecting guns. We drew a line around one lonely island, and then we got out of the way and let a 2-ton mountain of an animal remember how to be 100,000 of itself. Sometimes saving a thing is not something we do. It is something we finally stop doing. The seal never needed our genius. It needed our absence. And when it finally got that, it took a scrap of survivors the experts had already buried and rebuilt, an entire coastline, scars and all, without asking us for a single thing, except to leave it alone. If this changed the way you think about what it means to save something, or about what a mere handful of survivors can turn into when we simply step back, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Subscribe and stick around. We publish a new one of these every single week, one real story of the natural world at a time. And if this was worth the last 20 minutes of your day, hit the like button before you go. It tells us which of these stories to keep chasing. We will see you on the next beach.